In this video, I look at the Turnhole Tunnel, also known as the Jim Thorpe Tunnel. This tunnel is located in the Lehigh Gorge State Park, just north of Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. It was constructed by the Lehigh Coal and Navigation Company in 1866 and operated by the Central Railroad of New Jersey as part of its main line through eastern Pennsylvania. The tunnel passes through a rock face called Moyer's Rock, where a set of pillars mark the remains of a bridge. I also look at two double-tracked railroad bridges, including one which was constructed by the Lehigh Valley Railroad and now carries the Reading and Northern and Norfolk Southern Railroads. If you like this video, please feel free to leave a like below, and if you would like to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe to my channel. This is the Turnhole Tunnel, also known as the Jim Thorpe Tunnel, and it used to be a tunnel along originally the Lehigh and Susquehanna Railroad, and later the Central Railroad of New Jersey used this. And obviously there's a bunch of debris and stuff that has piled up on the entrance. But yeah, this used to be a tunnel. Actually, looking at the width of it, and you can still see some of the railroad ties. It apparently was a double track tunnel. And the walls look like they're made of slate or shale or something of that nature. Someone put a smiley face on one of the rocks, and some remains of some railroad ties. And someone put a heart, and someone loaned someone else. And here's the railroad ties. You can see one side, and then the other side's over here. So yeah, it would have been double track. And imagine these rocks would have basically caved in or something. And yeah, there's been debris accumulating on the entrance, but and this is the end of the tunnel. And here's this tunnel actually exits a cliff face onto the Lehigh River. So it would have just come right out of the Lehigh River or out of the tunnel, and then went over the Lehigh River via a bridge that used to be held up by those two pillars. So that's the Lehigh River flowing, that would be north, so upstream, and flowing downstream. And that right there is another railroad bridge as well. That actually used to be a railroad bridge. That's now a road bridge, but there's another actual railroad bridge down on the other side of that. So would have been three double track bridges crossing here. So there would have been the one that came out of the tunnel, that would have been a double track bridge. And then the bridge, you can actually see the second pillar for the bridge beyond that. That would have been a double track bridge too. And the interesting thing is since this was owned by the Central Railroad of New Jersey, I believe at least one of those bridges may have been the Lehigh Valley Railroad's bridge. And the interesting thing about the Central Railroad of New Jersey and the Lehigh Valley is they basically were in direct competition. So they pretty much built their track almost side by side each other. So whenever you see a piece of Lehigh Valley track, there's going to be almost always a piece of Central Railroad of New Jersey track right next to it, and vice versa. And of course, the story behind that is originally the Lehigh Valley Railroad ran from the coal fields of Pennsylvania to Easton, and the Central Railroad of New Jersey ran from Easton through New Jersey to New York City. And they would basically be an interchange at Easton, where they transferred coal from the Lehigh Valley Railroad to the Central Railroad of New Jersey. But both railroads decided they wanted to compete with each other, so the Lehigh Valley Railroad built some track through New Jersey in direct competition to the Central Railroad of New Jersey to give them their own path from the coal fields directly to New York City. And then the Central Railroad of New Jersey, of course, responded by effectively buying out a bunch of railroads in Pennsylvania, so they got their own route from up to the coal fields down to New York City. So I believe the railroad that the Central Railroad of New Jersey brought out was the Lehigh and Susquehanna Railroad. And this tunnel actually may have originally been part of the Lehigh and Susquehanna Railroad before it was owned by the Central Railroad in New Jersey. So this is actually a good view of the tunnel. It's actually really quite a short little tunnel here. You can see the end of it right there. And there's some people scribble some things on the end of it. But yeah. The other interesting thing is the other two railroad tracks, they don't actually have a tunnel on them, so it's interesting that the other two railroads didn't bother building a tunnel, but this railroad did. I mean, maybe the tunnel gave them a more direct, straighter path through here so they could travel faster, or maybe there just wasn't enough room to build their tracks, so they had to build a tunnel here. So here is just walking back through the tunnel towards the entrance. And there are some railroad ties you can see. And that noise in the background is the cars going over the railroad bridge that was converted to a car bridge. So basically put wooden top over the bridge and created a path for the cars. So it is noisy going over. This is also a whole lot drier than some of the other tunnels I've been in, like the Roseville Tunnel. And this is another shot of the entrance to the tunnel. And what's interesting is, well, there's some railroad ties, but there's also a piece of steel rail from the railroad track that's just left here. So apparently they didn't completely remove all of the tracks like they usually do when they abandon a railroad. And you can see the cut that was made as part of the tunnel on both sides of it. And someone wrote the word welcome on the tunnel. And this is a view of the tunnel from the road bridge. And you can see how the tunnel exits onto what would have been a bridge that crossed directly over the river. And this is the cliff face or rock face that they actually tunneled through. So that below there is the Lehigh River. And you look around behind me, this right there, right here in the background is the existing railroad bridge. So that bridge is still active. And what I'm on right now is the railroad bridge, which was converted to a road bridge, so they covered it over with wood. But that railroad back there is still operational. I believe it's operated by the Reading and Northern Railroad or something of that nature. And I saw they do some railroad tourism, so some historic railroad on that as well. The train, I saw a train at Jim Thorpe, and that train actually travels up through here. So it gives a scenic travel through the Lehigh Gorge and the Lehigh River. This is a view of the tunnel from the other side of the river. So this tunnel was originally built by the Lehigh Coal and Navigation Company, of which the Lehigh and Susquehanna Railroad was a subsidy of. So this would have originally been the Lehigh and Susquehanna Railroad. And as I said before, it was consolidated with the Central Railroad of New Jersey when they expanded into this region. But this railroad would have been used for traffic up until the 1910s when it was converted over to a side instead of a main line. But yeah, we can see that the railroad goes up, and there's another pillar in the woods over there, so it would have traveled across the river. And there's the other two bridges. So that's the bridge that the road goes over, and the other one is the bridge on the other side of it, which is still a railroad bridge. So I'm going to take a look at those in a second. So that bend over there on the other side of the railroad bridges, that was called the Turn-a-Hole Bend, and that's where this tunnel got its name from. And the rock that I actually tunneled through was called Moyer's Rock, so it's actually a pretty substantial piece of rock. Let's see if I can get the profile of it. Yeah, it's a pretty substantial piece of rock that they had to tunnel through.